Alrighty. Hello everyone. Thank you for coming and hanging out, and thank you for coming back in the room. It's kind of hard to follow someone like Adam, who's a legend in the industry. So the presentation I'm about to do has been nicknamed the Blizzard. You're going to get 72 slides with 59 links to further assets as I run through this. And let me start my timer. Yes. Yes. Last slide at the end has a QR code to the PDF of the deck I'm about to deliver. Okay? All right, so, wow. So they were warning me about the projector. It's got a funky laser gun. So that's supposed to be the color of my shirt. So when the colors turn out funky, here we go. Who likes beer? Who's staying for beer later? So I want to share with you my journey this year. I am attempting to do this pitch 30 times this year. The first time I did it was in OWASP Dublin. In February, we launched the OWASP MASVS V2, which is the MASVS, the mobile version of the ASVS. Believe it or not, Guinness has this little machine that allows you to print a picture on the top of a beer. So the celebrating party was literally printed, that's edible ink, on the top of the beer. Now, if you like that picture, I have a sticker of it here. I was not able to bring beer for you from Dublin. But there is beer tonight. So I'm Brian Reed. I've been doing mobile since the days of BlackBerry. Anybody have a BlackBerry device still? Good one. If you want to hear crazy stories, find me later. Anyway, so NowSecure was founded at the beginning of iOS and Android in 2008 and 2009, so we've seen everything you can imagine. We got a couple of BlackBerry folks and then a whole bunch of people from Good Technology and others since then. We work with kind of the who's who of everybody, and thank you for having us here. We do a lot with standards, so one of the co-spec leads is a member of NowSecure, and they spend 100% of their time working on the spec, not really working on NowSecure technology. The other co-spec leader works for Standard Chartered Bank, and then the third one does a lot of training in Europe for ISAC and a few other groups. We also work with ADA and IOXT. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that at the end. There's actually a case study at OWASP about how organizations can use it, and that's one of the first of very many QR codes you're going to see flying through my ride. Anybody use Frida? Frida? If you're in reverse engineering, use Frida, and you can come have one of these cool stickers afterwards. So we also create Radari and R2 Frida's very common tools. We love open source and continue contribute to it. People love stickers, so I have these. When you're done, come up front, and there's a pile of them right there, along with a bunch of others. The state of mobile AppSec. So I'm going to start with a little history of why the world is mobile and why the world is a mobile train wreck. So more financial transactions were done on mobile devices than web laptop, or PC applications at Christmas last year. So literally billions of dollars worth of transactions go through mobile. Think about your own business. What percentage of security spend is on mobile versus web? Probably not remotely correlating to the transactions in your business. So we have this mass scanner that bulk downloads all the apps from the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. There's about 6.5 million of those. Benchmark data I'm going to use today, 85% of them fail OWASP MASVS. That's pretty bad. I guarantee you have vulnerable apps on your phone today. So, anybody have any of these? I'm betting some of you do. Who would like to guess which ones are vulnerable? I'm going to make it easy, the ones on the right. Anybody like Chick-fil-A? Anybody ever use MyFitnessPal? Yeah, sorry. So mobile breaches keep rolling. Last year's top 10 breaches are here. As you might expect, there's things like, Chinese malware, otherwise known as the Olympic app. If you go to this, we'll show you the top 5 vulnerable breaches that were exposed in the press last year, not necessarily the top 5 in the world. The other thing that's very interesting is all the government agents are watching the war in Ukraine. So there is a building that no longer exists over the Russian border, and it seems that a Russian soldier opened VK, which is the Russian version of Facebook, and about 35 minutes later, the building went down. So, anybody drive a Hyundai? Make sure your app's patched. Now, for those of you who do network-based pen testing, you will notice how easy it is to proxy data through burp and discover that the unpatched version of the Hyundai app was actually easy to take over. That had been available since 2012, meaning that has been there forever, and it only took somebody late last year to find it. Push-whoosh. Push-whoosh is your classic supply chain issue. It was an SDK used for push, very popular SDK used for push. You can see some of the organizations, including like the US Army. Suddenly last fall, it turned into data harvesting malware. And then after a little more research, people realized there was a legal front company in the US that was tied back to Russia. It appears to have been activated sometime last summer by the Russians. They were using it for data harvesting and all that other fun stuff. We went and looked at our NowSecure benchmark data in the App Store. We found about 8,000 mobile apps installed. We did a bunch of fire drills with the US federal government to help them clean them up. So again, like every other part of the market you look at, SCA still matters in the land of mobile. And then if you don't think it matters, it does. The first 2 GDPR fines in Europe were actually for mobile breaches. So British Airways, you may or may not recall, had a large breach in 2017, 2018. It was through a mobile attack vector that got through privilege escalation in the back end. They were fined £158 million, so they made an example of it. I asked about MyFitnessPal. MyFitnessPal share price went down 20% in the 2 weeks after the breach of 150 million records made the press. 2 C-suite people were gone. You can obviously imagine the CISO and the CIO. If you want to hear the story about how they didn't security test it, find me later. And we're just north of California. I was just in California yesterday. Enforcement is coming, and the first enforcement warnings are out there. We were just talking about the FDA as well, and that's coming. What do you think? All right, if you want to hear a story about what's going on with TikTok, find me later. I can't talk about it in public. All right, so why do we do mobile? Right? Everyone in this room has used at least 3 mobile apps today. You probably used 10. How many people ordered food? Like Starbucks? Took transport? Right? We live on this stuff, right? And so every business, if you're not doing something with mobile, you may be out of business. And I remember in the early days of mobile, the view was people are just going to use a web browser and, and boy, does that suck when you don't have a native app, right? I mean, it's really awful. So everybody has a mobile app. So when you're in IT, if you're on the business side of IT, you have your website and you have your mobile app. There are businesses that don't have websites and have mobile apps, but any business that has a website and not a mobile app may not be a business for very long. And so when we think about that, right, the innovation is super cool, but it seems like 80% of the world, or maybe 75% of the world, forgot, I'm supposed to protect that sensitive data that lives on this mobile thing. We've got an economic benchmark we're working on, and it's got survey data in it. And what we're seeing so far is that 5 to 10 times more dollars, labor, and effort is spent on web application security than mobile application security. However, for most businesses, at least half their engagement and transactions are on mobile. So there's this entire discontinuity between where the risks are, where the data is, and all the rest. Sorry, who's got mobile experience? Got it? Any mobile pen testers in the room? All right, very good. Keep me honest. So, differences between web and mobile. This course that I'm basically walking you through is designed to be half builder and half breaker. So I'm going to half talk about a development audience, and I'm going to half talk about a security or pen testing audience. The fundamentals of mobile when you think about it, and I asked about who was using Frida and Radari earlier. In a mobile application, all of the code lives on a mobile device that is reversible. I'll say that again. All the code lives on a mobile device that is reversible. When you build a web app, 98% of the logic, data, and transactional information is behind a firewall and layers of, hopefully, API security, as we just saw. On a web app, it's all there, right? And I'm going to show you some stories of how bad that is. Now, on top of that, you got to keep up with new languages. The operating systems rev every year, right? We just had iOS 17 beta hit as well. Android's out there. Everything continuously updates in the world a lot faster than the web side of the house. So now you've got velocity challenges, you've got variability challenges, you've got innovation challenges, you've got a fundamental architecture where all the code's running in the wild on that mobile device. That means from a developer perspective, there's more chance for a train wreck, and I'll show you some of those stories. Now, how many people are familiar with the ASVS for the website? Don't worry, I won't test you to tell me what all 14 are. The OWASP MASVS is a mobile-specific version. So in 2013, we and a number of other folks realized that mobile was different enough. We needed to start down the path. First, MAS was delivered in 2015. We've continued to evolve. I'm going to focus on version 1.5 today, but there's version 2.0 that's later in the end. If you want to learn more about mobile versus web, this is a really great guide you can use yourself, but it's also good for developers and your management. It's not too in the weeds, but it's just enough to tell the story I was telling you before. It's actually our #2 most popular download on our website as a learning guide. So when you think about the anatomy of attack on a website is, okay, there's this giant Fort Knox with layers of defense, and I want to try to find a little peephole to get in. Anatomy of attack on mobile is completely different. So I've got a device, I can attack the device, I can detect the hardware in the device, the operating system in the device, the application on the device, the network layer in the device, the way the device communicates with other backends, over through the crowd and into the back end. Now, a poor developer can write leaky code, or a bad guy can penetrate, depending on where they go. So when we think about the anatomy of attack, while we talk about mobile AppSec, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is actually thinking about the entire value chain of how an application is delivered. Now, if you're looking at this from an attack perspective, so if you're an offensive or otherwise, we didn't talk about this last night, the MITRE attack and the MITRE mobile attack is a great place to go. This is another example where the web and mobile world are different enough that we needed a different attack model. Now, part of the reason to bring this up is that if you are getting into mobile, this is a great place to learn. If you've got a red team in your business, this is a good one to understand as well. And I used the MITRE attack to actually look at where some common attacks have been. So device-side attacks have been like WeChat and OkCupid and Malbus. Network-based attacks, Walgreens and Plenty of Fish, OkCupid, knows pattern, they like dating apps. And then Under Armour and British Airways were both against the back end, right? So MITRE mobile attacks is another way to build out your skill sets and have an understanding and help you work with your operational security team on what should be going on as well. So, what does the attack surface look like? There is layered diagrams, and you had some great diagrams earlier about microservices architecture and all the layers, right? And you want to have some perimeter security and then layered API security through it. When we take a look at the app world, there's the app part, which is the code, the architecture, and things on that side. Then there's the data in use, which is actually what's going on in the operating system. There's data at rest, which is what you store. There's data in motion over the network. And then there's the stuff you talk to on the back end. Now, if you remember this, now you're going to see this again in a few minutes as I go raging through the story. So our goal is to teach our developers how to do this right. How do they write code securely that properly handles data at rest and data in motion and securely connects into the back end, right? So one of the things we were talking about last night is that as OWASP is trying to grow community, we want to be able to engage the developers, not just the security team. And so that's going to be part of where I'm going to take us. So, the OWASP Mobile Security Project. So the next couple of minutes is going to be the basics of what the OWASP Mobile Project looks like. There is a dedicated website at mas.owasp.org. We encourage you to go there. Kudos to the handful of volunteers that built out this entire new website. All the resources you need to be successful are on this website for the current specs and the collaboration on the new specs. We also have a dedicated Slack channel and a Git repo. The fundamentals are the MASVS, which is the mobile flavor of the ASVS. Then you've got the MASTG. So the MASVS is basically the script, right? How do you want to work with your development team? What should your requirements look like? Security architects can use it. Application architects can use it. MASTG is your testing infrastructure. So how do I test? What do I test? I'm going to show you a picture of what that looks like in a minute if you printed it out. And then there's a security checklist. All of this stuff lives in Git repos, and all of it dynamically adapts. So when we update the MASVS to the MASTG, the checklist is automatically updated as well. So there's a lot of automated update infrastructure in it. So to get started, you'll want to read the one on the left, or you can read that one. So this is my cheat sheet to 500 pages of content in 10 pages of content. So this is a great place to get started if you're new into mobile, to just kind of give you a general sense. It also will work for developers, developer managers, or leadership, development architects, and so on and so forth. It's kind of a crib sheet running through some of what I'm going to show you now and the rest. So, when we think about applications, we know that not all applications are created equal. So, I'm going to walk through the fundamental structure of threat modeling and understanding different kinds of mobile applications so I can build a mobile strategy. Now, I've had some health issues, so I'm now using healthcare as a great example of something that will make you cry if you do this wrong or potentially kill you, right? so MASVS L1, it is your basic security. Think of something like the WebMD app, right? So, no one's pregnant in the room. Does anyone have a better half that's pregnant? Don't use the WebMD baby app, pro tip. Anyway, the regular WebMD app stores no information, has nothing about you. It's a completely information-oriented, right? What is this thing? I've got the sniffles, help me figure it out, right? About as low as you can get for risk in an informational app. That's MASVS L1. MASVS L2 is now, okay, I've got an application, and maybe this example, I actually use this app. It's a healthcare rate monitoring app that attaches to my scale. And so it's got my user ID and password, it's got my birthday, it's got a little bit of health information. It's not a HIPAA regulated application, but it's got a little bit of PHI in it. So I want to have some level of security that we call defense in depth. Now remember before that I said all your source code's in the wild with a mobile app? That's where the next category comes in, which is called resiliency. So if you think about your web infrastructure, you have a level of resiliency related to the layers of security defense you have on the front end of that. Well, now when your mobile application, frankly, source code is running on a mobile device that is reversible with things like Frida, you need to have, wow, pink. You need to have some level of resiliency, right? So this is an example of an application, and I'm not going to give you the name of the real one. This is an example of an application used by pharmacists and doctors to prescribe drugs. And it's popular because there's certain drugs that are like compounds where they combine like different medications together in a certain specific way for certain kinds of diseases. So we were asked to come in and help pen test an issue, and what was discovered was because they weren't resilient, there were people that were messing with the zip-based payloads and manipulating the data on the back end that could have created a killer cocktail, literally, right? So even though this has no personal information in it, even though it's got no other sensitive data in it, the IP itself is sensitive data, therefore you need resiliency in it, right? And I'm going to tell you how to do resiliency in a little while. Wow, it's really cool, the colors. And then finally, we do a lot of work with Medtronic. Defense in depth at Medtronic is a good example. Right now, if I use something like a healthcare delivery drug, we were just talking about another healthcare monitoring thing that I used to wear. But if you're wearing an insulin or you have a pacemaker, you really want to know that they're doing resiliency in that guy, right? So we'll talk a little bit about resiliency as well. Let me look at my watch. Cool. All right. Too fast? Too slow? Everybody's awake? Here we go. All right, so standard security best practices. We had a great conversation last night about what is minimum bar security. What is minimum bar? If you have a mobile development team, pull out L1, read through it. It's not very hard. There are simple things like how to do encryption, like how to do secure network communication, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, there's defense in depth now when you've got the higher degree of security concerns. You should be using cert pinning. Most developers don't know how to, so work with them to help them learn how to do that. Multi-factor auth, of course, everybody should be using multi-factor auth for everything, but then we're security people, we know it. And then you want to do all kinds of anti-tampering thing. The good news on the anti-tampering side is that Apple and Google are doing more. The bad news is they'll never beat the bad guys. So you need to have the proper architecture so that if the app is tampered with, you minimize the risk of what they can find. All right, so we're back to this picture, right? So now that we know what our attack vectors look like, and we know what the app architecture looks like, and we know we have our 4 risk levels, now we can create a construct. So MASVS has 8 sets of controls or requirements, and they map into this infrastructure. Now, to make it simple, we didn't invent a separate description of what should go on with API, we just used the OWASP API as a reference model. We also didn't reinvent the ABS for the web side of the house, so if you have a hybrid app that might be mobile but uses calls to the web, you might be using ASVS for part of that application as well. So we've got 2 components for code with MASVS code and resiliency. We've got architecture, platform, crypto and storage, auth, and network. Okay? So they look like that, right? Now, if you think about building a cookbook for developers, I'll start here and say, that's 8 things to teach them, of which inside of these, there's really only a handful of things to teach them. Now, in delivering a number of developer trainings and so on and so forth, I've also seen the world glaze over and, developers, it's too much, it's too complicated and everything else. So the rest of my talk is going to be about what things should you actually focus on within this in building a set of requirements and then building a test infrastructure to enable yourself to support this through the process. So, wouldn't it be nice if you had a cookbook that said, of the 6 million apps in the App Store, what are the 5 highest frequency vulnerabilities? And then you took that cookbook to your developers and said, these are the things most people make mistakes on. Let's go make sure these 5 things we do the right way, right? So we realized, like our mission in NowSecure is to save the world from unsafe mobile apps. We also realized that security is really a risk program. So when you make the choices about what to do, there isn't infinite time and there is no perfect security. So if we work with our teams and say, hey, these are 4 or 5 areas where there's most frequently vulnerabilities, let's make sure we do the basics right, that's awesome. If everybody did that, that average score, that 75% of apps in the App Store that get a score of a C or a D on an ABCDF curve would go up dramatically because then we would have a common bar. So, want to see some benchmarks? Go to that website. So, that website takes our data from the app stores, takes the 5,000 most popular apps, anonymizes the data, and then exposes a subset of the results. So what you can see here, as I'm looking at the popular gig economy mobile apps, there are 687 of them. They get an average score of 67. We do scoring that's based on CVSS, frequency and density. And so you can think of our scoring as like 90 to 100's an A, 80 to 90's B, 70 to 80's a C, right? So gig economy apps kind of stink because they got a 67. If my son came home with that, he'd be in trouble. You can also see where the data goes. So because we're doing automated dynamic testing, we're doing trace routes, you can see they send lots of data to China and Russia. And then from a distribution of vulnerabilities, I realize this is really hard to see, 219 of the 687 have high risks. That means they have 1 or more CVSS vulnerabilities at 7.2 or higher. That's not great, right? There's banking, healthcare, a bunch of other industries in there as well. What's interesting about this is for you to take home and say, hey, are we in one of these industries? Here's what our peer group looks like. Should we benchmark ourselves against the peer group? What should we try to drive for within our organizations, and so on and so forth. Now, for those who've been around, what's actually going on under the hood is we have device rigs that run in our data centers. We download an app from the App Store. We load it on the device. We run 4 passes against it, doing static, dynamic, interactive, and API security testing. All that data is dumped to our server in the cloud that then runs a process on top of it, displays the score and vulnerabilities and all that good stuff. So this isn't like humans could never do this scale, right, from that perspective. We use this for intelligence on what vulnerability patterns are and also ways to discover what features developers are using to create new vulnerabilities so we can better deliver products and services to make it work. So, here we go. Are there any builders in the room? Any developers in the room? There you go. All right, so we're going to do builder and breaker because we sometimes do too much breaker. Oh, this is the fun part. Flying Legos. So, these are Lego squishies. With me? Lego squishies. When I throw it, you don't have to duck. Okay? So, I'm going to ask questions and you can win one of these. Now, I don't know if I can get to the back row, so I'll go running up the hill. All right, so first question. Most frequent vulnerability? Encryption. Yeah, I'll give you that. There's something that's a companion to lack of encryption. Lack of certificate companion? Close enough, network. So, insecure data storage and crypto is the first one. Whose voice is that? When they're gone, they're gone. So let's take a look at this. 50% of those millions of apps have insecure storage and crypto. Most developers do not understand crypto. Most developers don't use mobile crypto correctly. Most of them don't store data correctly. Now, for those who are more security-centric, you're going to understand an example like this. If we were doing the live training, we would go through an example like this, show this, walk through code, and see how this creates an issue. To a large extent, this is due to ignorance on the developer's part. Right? Oh, the device is sandboxed. iOS is protecting everything. I can spew anything I want in the logs or anything into the application storage. No, you can't. Because I can reverse it. So, the next set of slides are going to look like this. So I'm going to talk through the MASVS components, and then we'll go digging into the resources. So these are all links. So you can see we're talking about V2 and V3. So that's links to the repos for V2 and V3. And then I've also got the Apple and Google developer documentation to go with it. We built these as like a cookbook that you could take back. So when you talk to your developers and say, hey, we need to take a look at storage and crypto, you can read these and pick pieces for them, and they can read these, right? And that will help you both work your way through it. And I need to double check because there's an update to one of the Android ones. So then we'll walk through basically a set of best practices. And so, sorry if I'm going to stand sideways just to make sure I read them. Avoid writing sensitive data to device. We find lots of forensic data left in log files because they're logging it just because they think they should log it, because why not log it? Because we might need it to debug it. Avoid query strings and sensitive data, another common shortcut, because that will get intercepted. Secure data storage is a feature set on iOS and Android devices, so make sure they're using that. And then make sure they're using really strong crypto. I had someone the other day say, should we be using SHA-1 or SHA-2? I'm like, no, 3 or more. Go way down the path. How many people know what quantum crypto is? Okay, there is a report about to come out of the federal government that's going to state that the Chinese will break all current crypto with their quantum computers within 3 years. If you and your organization are not strong on crypto now, you've got 3 years to get ready. So, short advertising. So they're calling it Y2Q for crypto, quantum crypto, Y2Q. So anyway, so again, this is a really simple place to work with your developers. Just go look through your source. What are they doing? How are they configuring? Are they using long enough bits? The other thing is to take advantage of the secure random API, right? So that you get more randomized data. Development side of the house, if you're looking for creds, dig into the logs in the IPC. That's where we find a lot of data and PII being stored. When you use a phone, right, you're in one app, you can kind of tab going to another app in the background. The app that goes in the background doesn't leave memory. So another app could potentially read the memory of that app. So you'll notice, like your banking app, when you tab into the background, the screen goes blank or drops a logo in it, because that's a common place for attackers to intercept data, especially when you're using Freedom. So make sure data is removed in the background and you blank out the screen. If you're using third-party crypto libraries, make sure they're actually good ones and they're properly configured. Device password is an interesting one. So believe it or not, people still don't use device passwords. We strongly recommend that your app unloads. Simple API called load time. It does this device have a device password on it. If it doesn't, don't. Why? Because the brute force attackers that have the farms, it's easier to attack your app if the device doesn't have a password or passcode on it, right? So it's just another way to give you layered security. Also look for hard-coded crypto secrets. That seems to be a new spike of issues that we've been finding. I was just at Droidcon for the last 2 days, and there was an exercise where a couple of Google Android security guys ran like an hour-and-a-half workshop, and the sample app they built had that in it because they're seeing more and more of that when they do their own scans of apps coming into the App Store. So Google and Apple do some layer of scanning to look for just basic things, but what they're really looking for is making sure you're not violating their terms of service. They're not really security scanning per se. But Android has a major security initiative going on that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, and so they're starting to find more and more and building up their own tech to do kind of mass scale scanning when people submit apps. So people find this framework helpful? So I'll get you the rest one. All right, get your brain thinking about what's next. So, what's the second one for flying Lego? Yeah?
Private key off the device.
No.
Insecure.
Insecure? No.
Third parties.
Interestingly enough, almost all of these have third party involved, but that's not what I'm hunting for. Believe it or not, that's the best scoring one. Not the worst scoring one. That would be the last one I did. Jesus, here. Doesn't give me one now. He already answered the last one. All right. What happens when I don't use, what is the category of not properly using certificate pinning?
Traffic interception?
Yeah. Who said man in the middle? I'll give you that. Did you get one already?
I already got one.
Here you go. Come on. Network. Who wants to say network first?
Network.
I heard network up there. Flying good way. Whoops. All right. So the second one is network, and I realized I think you said network before, didn't you? 48%. We got 2% better. Amazing. So it's the same thing with web, right? How often do they forget to use SSL in a web app, or you've got a third-party library that makes the call, et cetera, et cetera. Interestingly enough, like the Facebook authenticator, a lot of people would misuse that and do that in an unencrypted way. So anyway, insecure data communication, while the storage thing, developer might think, oh, I don't really care because someone needs to have hands on the device. They're not thinking about the fact that another app could be scraping it off the device. In this world, this is your classic, pineapple in a Starbucks problem. And as we saw earlier when I was showing the MITRE attack, this is a very common mechanism. The thing to think about here is your app may be vulnerable, but it could also be being surveilled for attacks in different ways. The nation-state actors are looking at your logic and your transmission. They're using it to discover what all your API endpoints are, right? So if you have unexposed or unprotected API endpoints that mobile developers set up because they're in a hurry and the rest of the security team didn't look at, we find those all the time. So network communication is the largest chapter, MASVS v5. There's really good documentation from Android and Apple for your developers on how to do the right thing. Order of operation is important, right? So properly generating TLS sessions. Cert pinning should be for anything with regulated data. Cert pinning is not necessarily easy, but there are APIs you can use. So around about iOS 7, after all the challenges and complaints in the iOS world, Apple came up with ATS, or App Transport Security. It's a simple call, API call that you can make that will force encryption to a TLS tunnel for every application interaction between the mobile app and the back end if you turn on ATS. When I look at our data, the benchmark data against the store, there are a lot of people that intentionally turn it off and do something else. Now, part of that is because of history. There's a lot of apps in the App Store that existed before iOS 7, so they had to roll their own. But if you're building a new application, or if you're doing threat modeling, if you're doing code scanning and code quality, look for ATS on iOS or the equivalent of NSC, the network security configuration on Android. Do a SAS scan. Just go look and see where you can find it in your repos and make sure they're using those and not something alternative unless there's a really specific reason. You should not be using the default encrypted and authenticated network security built in. One of the other things to look for is zip files in transit. Remember I did that drug example of zip files in transit. Malicious actors can get in there, they will change the payload, and then depending on what happens, on the client side, that payload could do something malicious or not. And so you want to make sure that doesn't happen. And then looking at third-party libraries, so we do binary analysis. We can generate a partial SBOM out of that to figure out the libraries. But you should be using, looking to third-party libraries for sure. I would say probably a third to half of the vulnerabilities we find are in very common third-party libraries, not in the first-party code written by your developers, right? Average mobile app is 60 to 70% third-party, so a lot of the stuff we find, like we find crap with Facebook Authenticator all the time. As an example, a lot of other of the popular third-party libraries, some of them have CVEs that haven't been updated. Remember Heartbleed? Heartbleed ripped through the mobile app community, as did Pushwish last fall. Oh, I forgot to ask the question. Okay, so insecure coding practices. Wow, we've moved 1% better to 47% of all the apps we test, right? And this is like a large bucket. So there are a lot of different coding examples of where developers can most frequently make mistakes here in the MASVS. Some things to look at here. So you've got code quality. The interesting thing about it is there isn't like a code quality chapter for Apple or Google. So we really only have MASVS to look at. But we do mass scanning. We're looking for things like, are they using proper stack protection or ARC? We're looking at, our debug symbols still there. The last run I saw, 7% of the apps in the Android store still had debug symbols in them, and so on and so forth, right? If you don't have some sort of a secure coding handbook, you should try to put one together or download one of the common ones that are available over the web. The code quality is actually a really great place to start. There is a group working to improve that to be more developer friendly than it already is, but your developers can still use it today and get a lot of value out of it. Coding practice without cert, coding practices with keys and debug. Error conditions is the other thing, so we call overly verbose logs code quality errors, right? So we'll find all kinds of forensic material in those logs. They will log tokens, they'll log personally identifiable user information because they might need it later, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes that might have been for the development cycle, but then it winds up in prod. They don't disable it or throw the switch in the build. So you want to find that. And again, there's lots of crappy third-party libraries. It's like a broken record in this industry. Reverse engineering and anti-tampering. So I was about 6 months into the job. I've been at BlackBerry, I've been at Good Technology, a bunch of other places. And I was sitting in front of the CTO of a financial institution. And he said, I'm so excited to be talking to you guys because I keep trying to help the company understand the fact that all of our source code's in the wild because of the reversing capability of mobile. Right, so you probably noticed banking apps are pretty thin, and they keep as much logic on the back end as they possibly can because of the reversing challenges that we have in that world. So we find about a third of the apps are susceptible to it. Now, if you've worked around Apple and Google, then you'll know that on iOS there's a DRM capability that's trying to lock down your iOS, and there's some obfuscation that occurs around that. There are many tools on the internet that will DRM strip that in about 3 seconds. So it gives you a little bit of protection, but it's more kind of like a wrapper than anything to really protect you. On the Android side of the house, it's basically Java, right? So you can reverse engineer down to Java and really get an understanding of what's going on. When we do like offensive attack stuff, the first thing we do is go after the Android app because it's the easiest thing to get back to source. And there's a lot of surveillance and intelligence you can gauge just by tearing through that. So V8 is resiliency. There's some good advice in here that's good for your developers. Many of them don't understand the reversibility of the app. At Droidcon Thursday, really cool presentation. So some guys from Bolt. Bolt is the like the Uber of Europe. So it's like a car picks you up. They have scooters like Uber and all that kind of stuff. He got up, and this was a development guy who said, we use Frida to debug network issues. And it was really interesting because he showed how he leverages Frida to debug network, storage, and memory issues. Right? So there's a security tool, or reverse engineering tool, that developers can actually use because they'll debug their prod to work backwards and try to figure out what's going on. So he's going to try to publish a Frida training for developers, which I think is super interesting. There's a lot of activity in the Frida community. If you're into reversing, I don't know how active it is, but the Reversing Prevention Project is out there. And if you want to see what's going on with modern reversing tools, have a look at Frida Radari and the RT repo. So we strongly recommend you use third-party code obfuscation tools. There are many. We don't recommend any particular one, but there are many of them out there that you should use. Right? So these anti-tampering tools will help obfuscate their code. Some of them work in different ways. They make it harder to reverse. Even if you can slow down most of the people, you may not be able to stop the nation state guys, but you can slow down most of the other guys in the criminal gangs, which is really what you want to get to. The other thing to think about, and this is always fun to test for, is use some of the native anti-tampering that's actually built into iOS and Android. So there's a play integrity API on Android that basically, at load time, the developer can call it to discover if the device has been rooted or the hardware in the device, the firmware in the device has been tampered with. If that happens, unload. When you do that, that makes it much harder for the reversing and attackers to find their way through the app, get access to your source code and reverse it, right? If you're unloading dynamically, every time you load on a rooted device, that makes it a lot harder, right? There's a free to bypass for it, but so use Play Integrity API on Android, and there's device check services on iOS. It's the same kind of thing. Is this device been jailbroken? If you've been around this for a while, it's a cat and mouse game of Apple making it harder and harder to jailbreak, but they still keep jailbreaking. Apple doesn't have a single API that detects all possible variations of jailbreak. There's lots of calls that developers can make to discover the state of the device and any patterns in the device. And the device check services is getting better and better at providing some common services to look for that. The interesting thing about device services is that will also help you make sure that from the back end, you have a valid application talking to you, right? So if someone goes out and gets a hold of your code and builds a malicious or rogue version of your app and tries to talk to your back ends, it will see that the integrity break of the application. So the device services will look at the device level, but also looks at some of the application forensics. So test for reversibility, make sure you do the rest of your testing before you turn on the reversibility, right? So if you think of order of operations, I'm going to do continuous security scans while I'm building the app with the anti-tampering turned off, because you want to see all the vulnerabilities, you want to fix them, and then your last run, after you've done every QA and everything else, is to compile it again, turn on the reversing, run your tools again, and make sure they can't break it, right? So a lot of customers, especially in regulated industries, is they'll crack open Frida on their final binary and make sure it can't fully reverse or has some level of wall that it hits running through all that. When you're on the AppSec side of the house, right, so test for the reversibility yourself, look for the APIs, you can just scan your code to see if these APIs are being called. We have a lot of customers who will just write simple scan routines to look for some of these APIs to make sure they're using it, kind of creates guardrails and consistency, and it doesn't have to be complex, you just put it in the pipeline, scan your repos to make sure your apps are doing the right thing. And please don't do this. So, was with CISO and senior team of a financial top 20, 30 financial institution who said they didn't care about the vulnerability responsible disclosure we did because they just bought an anti-tampering tool. And somehow they thought that wrapping their app with an anti-tampering tool would protect them from vulnerabilities. Anti-tampering and vulnerability management are two very different things. A lot of developers do not understand that. So part one of your challenge is getting developers to realize that tampering and reversing is an issue, teach them a little bit about it, and then teach them that they need to secure the code, and then they also need to add anti-tampering techniques to what they're doing. So, fun picture. Wow, it's green. Okay, and then I threw the Lego for this one already. So, I am truly impressed to say that only 14% of the apps have vulnerabilities wrapped around off and off. So people are doing a pretty good job. I mean, to a large extent, I think, and I don't know what stats look like in the web world or with an ASVS scan, but I've got to believe that developers are getting better and better at handling this, especially if they're using multi-factor auth. This is not measuring the use of multi-factor auth. This is simply looking for things like credentials in clear text over the network, improper cert pinning, things like that, right? So within the scheme, there's some things to look for. Session and authentication management is V4. There's Android and Apple guidelines that developers seem to use pretty well. Teach the developers about the right things. There's still a few places where issues can happen. This one's a big deal. Run authorization checks for roles and permissions on the server side, not the client side. Why? Because you can reverse it. So 2 stories real quick. That's my time. I'll skip other stories. Come see me, I got a funny story about how to generate your own fake coupons. Putting it all to work. Okay, so I'm going to blast through the last ones. We've got a bunch of manual testing resources. All those links will take you to all of the assets I just went through and some common tools. You're going to need something for networking like Burp and Zed. You want Frida, Radari, or both. You need jailbreak and root devices. If you want to get started on this, Android is way easier to get started than iOS. And then there's automated tooling. This will be the extent of my commercial. We'd love to talk to you about that if you want to. So MASPS V2 just happened. It's way better. So we encourage you to look at it if you're already in the mobile space. Have a look at this. One of the things we did is we took out a few things that belong in ASVS. We're also doing more alignments with NIST, so you'll see a closer alignment there and reference into that. So you're going to see a lot more happening around SAM and NIST standards as we try to blend the standards together. You should see some of that coming in ASVS, some of the other projects. That is the actual launch we did in Dublin, so that video lives on YouTube. This book they gave me, that is about 2 inches thick. That is the MASTG, that's how much is in there. If you're going to do it all, please join the team. There's another barcode for you. We're looking for more contributors. Mobile and web are different. You need to know it. Developers need to know it. Learn the 5 things that are different. Use the assets and resources in here. Take advantage of all of that. That'll make your life better. And Apple and Google are changing the rules again. So Apple is now doing privacy and nutrition labels. So when we talk about transparency, software transparency and liability, here it comes. Adam talked about liability earlier. It is coming. This is already here. So if you hadn't noticed on your iPhone, there's now a bunch of label stuff, and there's going to be more security coming there. Google has created something called the data safety section, and they're beating Apple to the punch, which is you can actually get certified. So there is a standard called Masa, which is built on OWASP. So this is where we take a standard that already exists, we extend it into a specific area. This is the components of MASTG level 1 that carry over. There are 5 certifying labs. We're one of those. There's a couple hundred certified apps in the Android store already. If you are producing the Android applications, get ready for this. This is going to become mandatory in the next 12 months. So get ready for it. We can help you get there. And then tons of resources. If you like training, everything we do is free for training. So if you're new to mobile AppSec, if you're a web pen tester, whatever, go to academy.nowsecure.com. It's all free. The only paid part is if you want a cert at the end. Pretty little label. And then we do twice a year something called Stranger Bones. Pretty cool. So that's the spring one. There's a fall one coming. If you like to do talks and you're in mobile, please see me. We're looking for more talks for the fall. We're doing building mobile apps with GitHub Copilot next week and a tech talk. All kinds of exploiter tools. Our founder's doing video around building mobile apps. This founder video series is great for your developers. And we have a new security SDK if you want to play with new tech. You can sign up there. If you want a free report, see me or see one of those barcodes. And who wants stickers? There's a whole bunch here. When you're done, please come take them because I don't want to carry them home. This one's fun. This is what I wear when I do developer talks. So I had that on yesterday. And that's the link to my Prezzo. So I know there was a ton in there, and that was 45 minutes, so I think I'm done. So I will be here. If you have any questions all day, I'll hang out here for a little while. If you are looking to grow your career, if you think there's a shortage of cybersecurity professionals, there's a massive shortage of mobile. Also, in many businesses, they pay a premium if you have mobile skills. If you're a web pen tester, it's a way to upgrade and actually make more money. So think about that. Come see me for the training or otherwise. Thank you for your time.